Dean of the Reynolds School, and it's my privilege to welcome everyone to the 2017 Robert Laxalt Distinguished Writer Lecture. The Laxalt program was established in 2001 to honor Robert Laxalt, Nevada's most eminent writer, and to inspire new generations of journalists to consider the many paths of storytelling which Bob Laxalt trod, from news and through memoir and fiction and poetry and screenwriting and playwriting and the like. This wonderful program is made possible through the support of the Reynolds School in partnership with Nevada Humanities, and we wish to acknowledge our appreciation for our friends at Nevada Humanities for many years of productive collaboration. Thanks also to the John Ben Snow Memorial Trust and to the community contributors to the Laxalt Program Endowment at the Reynolds School of Journalism. We are honored to have members of Bob Laxalt's family with us tonight. Please join me in welcoming them in front. Nick and Kristen, welcome. As always, the Laxalt program has impact beyond this evening's presentation. At Sundance Books over the noon hour, our Laxalt distinguished writer discussed her writing and research craft in conversation with the gifted veteran journalist John L. Smith, and it was a very lively conversation with a standing room only audience. So thanks to Sundance for that, and to John L. Smith, who was with us tonight. John, welcome. And right next to him, Sally's mother, Sarah Denton. Sarah, we're so glad to have you with us this evening. After the Sundance event, Sally and John met with Professor Caesar Andrews' investigative reporting class today for a terrific exchange that really helped the students sharpen their projects around the impacts of police-involved shootings. So as you can see, the Laxalt Distinguished Writer program really touches campus and community, and we're so grateful to everyone who is involved in making this happen. Our Laxalt Distinguished Writer is a fourth-generation Nevadan, born in Elko and raised in Boulder City. Sally Denton was exposed to journalism early in life, as her father was the attorney for Hank Greenspun, the publisher of the Las Vegas Sun. She attended our university for a few years in the 1970s before earning her degree from the University of Colorado. Sally Denton began her journalism career at her hometown paper, the Boulder City News. Her investigative achievements at her next stop in New Mexico drew the attention of the legendary investigative reporter Jack Anderson, who hired Sally. She later worked at several other news outlets in print and broadcast before turning to book-length investigations. Her 8 books have dealt with secrets of government, of business, of religion, and have been recognized with numerous awards. The most recent book, The Profiteers, Bechtel and the Men Who Built the World, was named Best Investigative Book of 2016 by IRE, the Organization of Investigative Reporters and Editors. Sally has received numerous prestigious fellowships for her work, including the Guggenheim and the Kluge Fellowship, which is awarded by the Library of Congress. And she is a member of the Nevada Writers Hall of Fame, which is right next door in the Knowledge Center, having been inducted in 2008. And it's lovely to note that Sally claims Robert Laxalt as a mentor, so it's doubly appropriate that she is being honored here tonight. Following her talk, we'll open it up for your questions, and then we will close with a book signing outside the theater. So, please join me in welcoming our 2017 Robert Laxalt Distinguished Writer, Sally Denton.
Wow, thanks everybody for coming tonight. I am so thrilled and honored to get this award. This is something really close to my heart. Is this okay? Is that getting a reverb? Robert Laxalt was an early and avid supporter of my journalism and writing, and I've been a fan of his work since I was a little girl, and his Sweet Promised Land was in my parents' library in Boulder City. I want to thank the Reynolds School of Journalism, especially Dean Stavitsky and Christina Barr from the Nevada Humanities, and Barbara Trainer for helping get organized all of this so that it's been just a seamless trip here. I want to thank my old friend Warren LaRude for championing my work for decades, and the Laxalt family, especially Nikki, for being so gracious in all these years. I want to thank my mother, Sarah Denton, for traveling here tonight, for it was she who cheered me on this writing path for a very long time. And my partner, John L. Smith, who could write the definitive book on the subject of killing the messenger, which is the topic of my talk tonight. I first came to the University of Nevada as a guileless 16-year-old freshman, bringing little more than a fierce curiosity, a blossoming social conscience, and an enthusiastic desire to write in the place where Walter Van Tilburg Clark wrote City of Trembling Leaves. To my young eyes, UNR had it all. I'm especially happy to be standing here in this building named for Joe Crowley, who was my first and favorite political science professor. The campus was alive in that fall of 1970. Frankie Sue Del Papa, who would become my dear friend many years later, but who I was in complete awe of back then, was the first woman elected student body president. There had been massive protests on campuses against the Vietnam War throughout America, and UNR was no different. When I arrived that fall of 1970, students were outraged at the firing of English professor Paul Adamian for his participation in the campus unrest. Reno then would turn out to be a fertile incubator for my rich future 30-year career as an investigative reporter and author. My story is that of a girl born and bred in a small Nevada desert town who, as a rookie crime reporter, stumbles into the dark heart of American corruption, to the often compromised core of political and economic power. When I began my journalism career in the 1970s, it was the halcyon days of post-Watergate investigative reporting. Newspapers throughout the land were creating teams to probe government malfeasance and white-collar crime. I was one of the few women to enter that realm, that male-dominated world, to tackle the tough subjects traditionally reserved for the most hardened smoking men reporters: organized crime, drug and gun trafficking, murder, police corruption, political bribery, CIA-sponsored foreign coups. It probably helped that growing up in Nevada gave me a ringside seat to goings-on that might shock those who were spawned in less colorful settings. I had no way of knowing that along the way my life would be threatened, I would be sued, my 3 sons would be endangered, stories would be killed, publishers would be reluctant, and that the books I wrote would take me into increasingly deeper and darker territory. My first reporting job came accidentally when the publisher of my hometown newspaper hired me as managing editor after I graduated from college. Armed with a degree in English literature and little understanding of the larger world, I was eager to try my hand at journalism. I didn't realize until later that the publisher only hired me as a favor to his lawyer, my father, Ralph Denton, who was concerned about my preparedness to make my way in the world. But that reality eluded me, and somehow I thought I had landed the $75 a week job at the Boulder City News on my own merit. I sat at a desk with a manual Underwood typewriter, a steno pad, a black rotary dial phone, a 35mm camera, a ream of almond-colored paper, and a bottle of Elmer's rubber cement for cutting and pasting together whatever story I might dig up. There in the little newspaper office on Main Street in sleepy Boulder City, recently dramatized in the film La La Land, I embarked on my career. As the editor and sole reporter and photographer as well, I was charged with covering all the news in town. Turns out nobody had ever done that before in Boulder City, and the town didn't know what hit it. A few months into my short tenure at the paper, I wrote about a crooked politician and was so proud of my hard-hitting foray into investigative reporting, which was all the craze at the time. The publisher was vacationing in Mexico, so the story slipped in without his knowledge. Unfortunately, the politician was a crony of my boss, who fired me so fast by long-distance telephone that I barely had time to pack up my clip file as evidence of my so-called journalism experience. But I was undaunted, as only the naive can be. And weeks later, I walked unannounced into a weekly newspaper in northern New Mexico while I was there visiting a friend. The 5-person newsroom at the Rio Grande Sun in Espanola was considerably larger and busier than the Boulder City News. I asked to see the publisher, and the man in the center stood up and introduced himself as Bob Trapp. I told him who I was and said that I wanted to apply for a job. He asked if I had any experience, and I told him yes. I had been the editor of a Nevada weekly, but was fired after just a few months. He asked what happened, and then he started laughing when I told him. And he said, "I could use someone like you," he said. My crime reporter just quit." I didn't know it, but Bob Trapp was thought to be one of the finest newspapermen in the American West. His unrelenting exposés of criminal activity were already legendary. He was proud of the rocks he displayed on a shelf in the newsroom, because each had shattered a window over the years. "There's a lot of people mad at us for a lot of stuff and for a long time," he once told an interviewer. For him, the rocks were evidence that the newspaper was doing its job of metaphorically throwing rocks at castles. My time under the tutelage of such an honorable and dogged newsman as Trapp set the stage for everything that unfolded in my future. I had been on the job less than a week when I was called to my first murder scene. BLM personnel had found an abandoned car registered to a young woman named Francine Valerio. She had disappeared 2 weeks earlier after being the only eyewitness to a stabbing death. Her decomposed naked body was found near her car, dead of a blow to the head with a rock. I was 24 years old, and I had never seen a murder victim. The violence stunned me, and I became obsessed with the case. After several weeks of single-mindedly trying to interview the cops and follow the leads, I commented to Bob Trapp that it seemed that the police weren't even trying to solve it. He replied that in the 20 years since he had founded the paper, the police rarely solved any murders in the remote and rugged county that didn't even have a coroner. I became determined to solve her murder. I had no formal journalism training, and my investigative skill set was limited to a close scrutiny of Nancy Drew mysteries in my teens. I fanatically pursued the clues. I dug into the newspaper's morgue and found more than a dozen recent unsolved murders of young women who had been bludgeoned, strangled, shot, or stabbed. What they all had in common was that they were exceptionally beautiful. They were all in their 20s. They were couriers for a heroin drug syndicate, and the cops were a lot more determined to hide the evidence and protect the killers than to find them. I spent the next year examining the many unsolved murders in Rio Arriba County and the victims' ties to a flourishing drug market in the picturesque nearby state capital of Santa Fe. We published an explosive series of stories. I accused the New Mexico State Police, including the chief himself, of covering up murders, taking payoffs from heroin traffickers, and enabling organized crime to infiltrate state law enforcement and politics. It was here that I felt my first real pushback, which made my little firing in Boulder City seem quaint. I found myself on the receiving end of the methods used to kill the messenger, the adage for blaming the bearer of bad news that goes as far back as Sophocles and runs throughout Shakespeare. First came the rumors about my personal life, the innuendo about my relationships with sources, my reporting methods. Then came the $140 million libel suit filed by the powerful state police chief against me and the newspaper. This would all fall into the risk category that I was just learning about. Even though the newspaper prevailed, the drawn-out litigation cost Trapp thousands and thousands of dollars in legal fees, and it stigmatized my reputation. On the reward side, my stories received state and national recognition and brought me to the attention of the legendary nationally syndicated columnist Jack Anderson, who hired me to join his team of investigative reporters in Washington, D.C. That experience served as a veritable graduate school for muckraking, where I honed my trade under some of the best reporters of the era. These were the glory days for the larger-than-life Utah Mormon who had risen to power with the legendary Drew Pearson, one of the most famous columnists in the 20th century. It was heady stuff to be a 25-year-old reporter working for the nation's most feared columnist, a man so threatening to the corridors of power that Watergate burglar G. Gordon Liddy plotted his murder, and the FBI's J. Edgar Hoover decried him as lower than the regurgitated filth of vultures. But it was during my time working for Anderson that I learned that the higher the stakes in the story, the higher the risk. The late 1970s was a historic moment in America during which more than a half dozen congressional committees were conducting high-profile investigations into such far-reaching scandals as the JFK assassination, the abuses of the CIA, the Teamsters Pension Fund, Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance, corruption within federal drug enforcement, the bribery case of Robert Vesco, just to name a few. Leaks were coming fast and furious into the Anderson compound of reporters, and I chased the leads as fast as I could, writing columns that thrust me into the nefarious world of drug traffickers, gun runners, assassins, and corrupt government officials that were Jack Anderson's daily fare. The stories were exciting and intriguing, sometimes dangerous, and always controversial. When the subjects hit back, they hit back harder than the police chief of a small western state. It was intoxicating to be part of a small cadre of young reporters writing columns that would appear daily in 1,000 newspapers throughout the country, read by 40 million Americans. And when it came time for me to spread my wings as a reporter, the Anderson luster opened doors in new directions. I next found myself as an investigative reporter for a CBS television affiliate in Lexington, Kentucky. It would be my 2 years in Kentucky that would be the diciest of my life. My stories began with a probe into the activities of two well-bred boyhood friends, scions of elite blue blood families, who formed what they called the Company, a drug and gun smuggling operation whose heart lay hidden in the Bluegrass state, but whose tentacles spread through the United States into Central and South America and the Middle East. Feted and protected at home in Kentucky, their vast connections included local police, state police, the DEA, Beautiful Couriers, Sandinistas, socialites, the FBI, the CIA, murderers, victims, governors, and senators. By the time I finished my series of stories about the Company, I had tied it to the murder of a federal judge in Texas and a prosecutor in Florida, as well as to the killing of witnesses in several cases. It was then that being on the receiving end of the methods used to kill the messenger were ratcheted up. Smears and lawsuits were benign by comparison. The ad hominem slanders were familiar, but now there were attempts to compromise me with drugs, with men. A federal law enforcement agency arranged to get me out of the country while a plot to kill me was defused. My stories gained attention from the New York Times and other national outlets, but colleagues in the local press in Kentucky refused to even report them, perhaps embarrassed by having been scooped by a mere television reporter. The TV station came under pressure to fire me, and when the news director was ordered to stop me from covering the huge story that I had broken exclusively, I quit. I began my career when investigative reporting was a time-honored tradition exemplified by Ida Tarbell and George Seldes. I had done the best reporting I was able to do, exposing corruption I thought important for the public to hear. A community ought to have a guardian angel in a newspaper looking over it, tapping it on the shoulder when it's screwing up, giving it some editorial advice now and then, the newsman turned mystery writer Tony Hillerman once said. At least letting the working class people know what's going on, if they're getting screwed somehow or other, as most of them are, usually one way or another. But I was not deified as an angel in Kentucky. Instead, I was marginalized, maligned. I expected finding another job to be easy, now that I had some real experience under my belt and what I thought was a good resume from now New Mexico, Washington, D.C., and Kentucky. But after submitting 24 applications to newspapers throughout the country, I did not receive one offer, which made me wonder if I was being blacklisted. My career might have ended there, if not for the fateful night of September 11, 1985, when Andrew Carter Thornton II jumped from a Cessna 404 and crumpled onto a Tennessee driveway under a failed parachute. The Kentucky blue blood, whom I had exposed as one of the ringleaders of the company, had 150 pounds of cocaine strapped to his waist, the image appearing on every national news network throughout the land. The Lexington-based smuggling ring could no longer be denied, and my lengthy expose could no longer be dismissed as what would later be called fake news. Soon I would have a contract with Doubleday to write a book about my reporting in Kentucky. The Bluegrass Conspiracy was a great success and launched me into the next phase of my journalism career as an author of investigative nonfiction. I went on to write 7 more books, all of which were controversial in their own way, but some got more pushback than others. When I wrote American Massacre about the 1857 slaughter of 140 unarmed men, women, and children by a Mormon militia, I endured hecklers at book signing events, online smears, and letters written to newspaper editors attacking me as anti-Mormon. When I wrote The Money and the Power about the rise of Las Vegas and the syndicate that controlled it, the book got slammed by Nevada reporters, letters to the editor attacked me as anti-Semitic, and there were frivolous lawsuits threatened that never materialized. I considered all of that part and parcel of doing this job and have become very familiar with the intimidation tactics used to discredit journalists and to dissuade exposés. But my most recent book, The Profiteers, about the Bechtel Corporation, marked the first time that one of my publishers backed down under pressure from the subject of the book, in this case, the Bechtel Corporation. The book had been vetted by both inside and outside legal counsel who found nothing actionable. Still, the attacks on my credibility and integrity worked as intended to undermine me in the eyes of my publisher. Simon & Schuster suddenly approached the book's publication, which they had been very excited about, as if it were a skunk at the garden party. That Simon & Schuster was susceptible to such bullying underscores what the Columbia Journalism Review recently described as the shadowy war on the press. We are seeing it every day, how the rich and powerful silence journalists using private investigators, creating phony attack websites, disseminating false claims of plagiarism, fabricating stories of reporters' personal lives. All of these are the risks of speaking truth to power in America today. When I told my 3 20-something sons about the subject of my talk tonight, they responded unanimously and only partially joking. "We know the risks, Mom. We've lived with them all of our lives. So what are the rewards?" they asked, no doubt remembering the threats, the smears, the tightened belts. Which made me really think about the rewards, because I've now devoted 30 years of my life to this. A journalism career brings little money and a lot of satisfaction for going after the right people and being able to look yourself in the mirror and know you're doing the right thing. Like the old prospector, the writer has the eternal optimism for the pot of gold that will come with a bestseller, a movie deal, a Pulitzer Prize. But that's just what we like to dream about. It's not really what drives us. If your goal is to get to the truth, then you're going to make a lot of enemies. If the maxim is true that you're known by your enemies, then I am worth a fortune. Thank you. And we're taking questions now, I guess.
We'll now be happy to take your questions. We'll try to raise your hand if you have one, and we'll run a mic to you. Here are our mic guys, and that way we'll have the questions captured on the recording, and everyone will be able to hear them as well. So we have Bob on this side and Professor Birkenbein over there. So
First question now.
How different were the attacks on you if you had been a man instead of a woman?
I think probably, how different are the attacks? Could everybody hear the question? I think the attacks, obviously the same kinds of attacks happen with men, I think it's different. It seems to be more personal, more ad hominem, more sexually related, more to dismiss the credibility. It seems like with a man, they go right into legal action, but there's also obviously a lot of intimidation and smearing of male reporters as well.
How do you see the future of investigative journalism with people resorting more to the internet? Does that free them up? And are they less thorough because of the urgency of getting things published right away?
You know, I don't know. John and I spoke to an investigative reporting class today, and I was really heartened by the earnestness and dedication of the students in that class. And I know that there's this whole sense that, you know, there's never been a worse time in journalism, and the papers are folding or being owned by wealthy people, and in fact, they've always been owned by wealthy people. But I do think that there's, on the flip side of that, I think there's a lot more available as far as on the internet. The internet is just, it's like it's a venue. I mean, you have to be, you can't just go on the internet and see something and report it as fact. I mean, it's just kind of a source. It's like to me, it's like a garage sale or a flea market. You know, you go there and you have to go through a whole bunch of stuff, and then you find this kernel. And so I'm really not discouraged. And speaking to this class today and looking at these, you know, young minds, fertile minds going out with a lot of passion, and I'm not at all here to dissuade them, but to know that if you're going to do the work, you're going to get, you know, you're going to get hit back, because when you're hitting powerful people, which is the whole point here, is to write the things that, I mean, if you want to be, you know, just take press releases, that's not journalism. And if you're going to be hitting people in their pocketbook and their business, you know, corporations, then they take it seriously.
How did you discover the relationship between Benny Binion and Jack Ruby?
Well, I'm not the one that discovered it, but I think I might have reported it in The Money and the Power. Yeah. I assume that was probably FBI files, and there was surveillance of that time period. I don't think that it was in dispute, and I think there's been several books written since I wrote about it, but I don't think even at the time it was much disputed. He had run, you know, Ruby had been in the rackets in Texas before, and had associated with Benny and long before anything in Las Vegas.
Sally,
Yes? Where?
after hearing what you said at lunch and listening to you tonight, I'm wondering if you have some ideas from where we should as a nation go right now. If from all that learning that you and your wonderful partner John have done, what do you see as hope that we could be doing?
Well, I think you just have to keep plugging away and hold people accountable. And that, you know, another second part of what I was answered one of the earlier questions, I have great hope, even though newspapers are failing in record numbers and are consolidating under corporate leadership. There's still, in my mind, there has never been a more exciting time to be a reporter in America. There's so much going on. The government, the current government and Congress, and there's areas of movement in every single walk of American life and government today that needs examination. And you've also got more outlets from websites and digital magazines and real magazines, paper magazines still too. And it just seems to me that I have 3 sons that are in their 20s, and they are avidly interested in current events and the news. And they don't get it from television, and they don't get it from newspapers. So, they're getting it somewhere and they're really informed, that they're not all, crackpot internet sites. So I'm pretty hopeful about the whole thing, but I think it takes, like anything, it's a democracy, keep it if you can, and that requires a commitment to free journalism.
Excuse me, taking that a step further, what I see just in the news we hear today, people believe what they want to believe, and then they'll be quick to believe the guy that says, well, that's fake news. And what I'm talking about is the gentleman running for Senate in Alabama. And the voters there that are devoted to him and his way of life, they believe what they want to believe. They're not going to believe anything anybody in any paper or any television set tells them.
I understand that, and I also think, though, you cannot overlook the fact that a lot of people believe a lot of things that they believe because people have spent millions and billions of dollars with a propaganda machine to get that out there. And so that's expected, and I think that there's always going to be that element, especially now with things moving as fast as they do with the technology, when you've got trolls on internet trolls and fake stories being spread by very sophisticated organizations. The only way to counter that is to have real news and real reporters, and I think it's just a commitment, a recommitment that I think everybody in America, a lot of people in America have woken up over the last couple of years and realized, this First Amendment thing is really important. It's crucial. The whole democracy depends on it. And I think this has been a good thing in some ways, that it's kind of like ripping the Band-Aid off. It was a festering sore that's been going underneath the surface here for quite a while. And now it's time that it's good. It's a good thing it's out in the open, and people can start really pointing to the evidence of the fake news and who's responsible for it, and how much are they spending to really alter people's minds and perceptions.
Hi, Sally. First of all, thank you for speaking truth to power.
Thank
That's
you.
something that we all need to do more of, I believe. I was wondering what kinds of ideas you have mulling around for your next book.
Oh, I hate that question.
But I hate to put you on the spot, but I know how do you decide where you're going to go from here?
I mean, all of my books are, even though they're seemingly unrelated, because I've written about organized crime, and I jumped from there to Kentucky and into the 19th century American West, and then fast forward to a global empire. And there really is a method in the madness. I don't know what it is, but I'm basically telling hidden history. I'm telling all the stories that other people aren't writing, from Helen Gahagan Douglas and Richard Nixon and the Pink Lady, to the plots against Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And these are stories that I think a lot of what I do is try and return people to their rightful place in history. They've been marginalized and ignored. And so I'm always kind of looking for the story that seems like it's not being told, and especially the stories that aren't being told that seem apparent to me that they're not being told for some reason. I mean, they're intentionally being ignored or dismissed, ridiculed. And so I'm always kind of it's kind of hard for me to say right now because the Profiteers was such a heavy lift. That was 4 years and really intensive research into a private corporation, which was a lot more difficult to do because I didn't have the luxury of Securities and Exchange Commission reports or filings, and it was a company held for 5 generations by a private family. And but so it's kind of at the end of a heavy lift, which was also a huge disappointment to be with a major publisher that had great expectations for this really being a breakout book for me nationally, and then to have them just kind of be intimidated. And probably all it took was one phone call from the corporation to the head of another corporation, because the editors in the editorial offices at Simon and Schuster acted like they didn't know where the pressure came from, but all they knew was you know, the book tour was slowed down, the distribution was slowed down, all of the interviews, the promotional interviews suddenly, didn't materialize. And so while I'm trying to be, the Pollyanna encouraging everybody to go out and do the big fight, I'm kind of falling away exhausted a little bit, but not for good.
Has there ever been a case that you felt maybe the power was too great, that you received such pushback or so many threats that you were like, okay, maybe this is not the right timing to push forward this story?
I have, but I haven't, I've never acted on it. But I also went through, and I talked a little bit about this today at Sundance, after the Bluegrass Conspiracy was the first, and then The Money and the Power, and those were really, those are heavy-hitting books, and with really dangerous people. And so then I was starting to have my babies then, so that's kind of when I did a detour into what seemed safer territory, another century before. But even those managed to be controversial in their own rights. But so now I was just kind of inching back up into the 20th century and now 21st century. And there's a lot of really dangerous stories out there. And there's a lot of powerful people that will go to any lengths to stop them from being told. So, but to answer your question, mostly the only time I kind of held back a little bit was when I was worried about my kids. They're all gone, I can do whatever I want now.
Sally, are you satisfied that Saran acted alone in the murder of Robert Kennedy?
Wow, John, I've never really looked at that case very much. I mean, I've read some on it, but I certainly know, I know a lot more about JFK's assassination than RFK's assassination. But, I gotta tell you, anymore, nothing surprises me. I mean, stuff that I thought 20 years ago, this is outlandish. I wouldn't even, and you have to be very careful because there are a lot of people on the fringe looking at a lot of different issues in American history today. And all you have to do is associate with one of the cranks or crazies and your career is ruined then. So you have to be very careful to vet the information that you get. And back to your question about, the internet. I mean, everything, if you can use the internet, some website as a lead into something, but unless you can get the documents, I mean, I'm very big on documents. And unless you can get something verifiable, I generally don't touch the subject. But that's always really interested me, and I remember being here a long time ago when Bob Kaiser, I think Warren LaRue introduced us, or Frankie Sue, and Bob Kaiser was here and had just written a book on RFK. And that's about my extent with even knowing anything about it.
In your long career, in your long career as a reporter, investigative work, you had people lie to you and mislead you and try and take you down false roads, which many people would say is their experience in looking at information that is presented today. What kind of advice would you give to the consumer of information out there to help them understand what is real and what is true?
So the consumer, you're not talking about reporters getting misled, but actual readers and consumers. I think a lot of it is kind of a gut check. You need to determine who do you think are the reliable sources in American journalism today. And there's also, there's newspapers in, it's a global network of news now. And but I think you look at the credentials. You look at Dan Rather. You look at who they are, what they've reported, what they've withstood during their careers, and and if you see a newspaper that you're reading and you think it's got a bias that is consistently biased in the same direction, then you question it. But there's a lot of ways to figure out the veracity and the credibility of who's bringing the news to you. And if you think, And if, you know, a lot of it is gut, too. You know, if you see a news organization, say Fox, or you know, the right would say it's CNN, I mean, you just kind of watch it and make your own determination. But it's, you know, it's up to the public to be informed and to keep informed and to question all of these, I think. And there's a secondary, kind of an ancillary part of that. If you're, what I thought the question was going is, what does a reporter do when they're being fed something, which happens a lot when they're trying to catch you, you know, give you a false document, get you going down a road that they're going to catch you with this false document, and then they'll ruin the story. The one thing Jack Anderson always said from the beginning is, you know, when I would write a column for him, he said every single thing in there has to be documented, because if you've got a car in there that was yellow and you're calling it white, the whole column is tainted. And I think that's really true. But I think you just kind of get a nose for it, and it's really just staying informed and read. You know, my mother, who's 93, probably reads 20 magazines a week. You know, she's better informed than anybody I know, but she's getting her news from so many different sources that then she determines what she thinks rings true to her.
Sally, many politicians either dislike or hate the press. It's been going on for a couple of centuries. Nixon hated the press, Agnew hated the press. Jack Kennedy canceled his subscription to the New York Herald Tribune. So my question in view of all that, is Trump doing serious damage to press freedom in this country, or will he be a passing thing?
He'll be a passing thing, and I don't think that he's doing the damage. I think that, you know, some of the concerted efforts by powerful corporations to direct the news in a certain way. I mean, Trump obviously has no love for the press. I don't think Trump even has an understanding of the role of the press in the society. But I have no doubt that he's going to go the same way as Nixon. And you're right, everybody hated the press. I mean, unless they were able to, you know, like Roosevelt with his fireside chats was able to kind of bring them in as a partner. But yeah, there's nothing new under the sun here. And, you know, like John said earlier today, somebody was talking about, you know, the billionaires buying the papers, and I guess it was at the journalism class. He goes, well, you know, I've never seen in all of American history some, you know, the Franciscans are not running the newspaper. So, you know, this isn't really that different. But I just think, you know, I'm really excited about the upcoming generation. That just based on my own sons, who obviously, you know, had more exposure than other, you know, kids their age, but they are also actively engaged and just voracious news followers. And they're not alone in their milieu. I mean, they might be in a bubble because they're in San Francisco, but it just seems, it's really promising to me. I mean, I don't know. I'm always kind of looking for the bright side in it all, but it seems, I think justice is going to be done in this situation, in this administration. It's just too over the top.
The advice that you just gave to the question about consumers and how does a consumer discriminate against what's true and what's not true, that's good advice for adults, but I think that the kind of credible naivete, when you say that young people have these days about whatever's on the internet is inclined to be true, and you know, they use it in their research papers in grade school and all that. First of all, what do you think we should be doing in the grade schools to teach kids to be discriminating information consumers? Ancillary question, have you ever done any investigative work on anything related to education?
No, I don't think I have. I mean, I've been an education reporter at different stages, but I haven't really looked at that, and I also haven't, you know, as far as early education news, there's a couple of things. This is a moment where everybody, there are so many conspiracy theories about so many things out there and so many people willing to believe them. And that's, I think, a real problem in American culture right now, that there's such a lack of trust in the government from so many sides. And, but you know, when I think about, I just have written, 8 books, spent 30 years doing it, I'm writing about all the stuff that never made it into the history book. So, there's reason for people to not trust what's in the history book in elementary school, So, I really, I'm not an early educator by any stretch, and I really don't know that area, but it's certainly a conversation that needs to happen in America today.
I was wondering, some people have asked a question, and mine's a little more direct, but I'm wondering if you could recommend some news sources that you generally consider to be reliable and credible, because that's the next question. Okay, you have to be careful, but where can you go? Even if they're not perfect, but all in all, you'd say relatively safe bets that they're going to be on the level and probably do a good job.
I read a lot every day, a lot of outlets. I read the New York Times every day, and I read the Washington Post every day. That said, I know the biases that the New York Times has and has had for decades, and I think particularly around Israel. And I know the biases that the Washington Post had from the early days, where some of the early editors came right out of the Office of War Information through the OSS. And then I read The Guardian, I read the LA Times, I read the Daily Beast, I read The Week, I read Time, and then there's a lot of different websites I read, Slate, and I don't know, of course, I'm like an aggregator in my mind at this stage of the game. I read it all and then kind of factor in, okay, Salon is left, so you're gonna get that, and then, the National Review is right, but when you start reading all of them and you're reading the different columnists, there's a big difference. I happen to be a liberal, but there's a lot of, the thinking conservatives are really interesting to read. The whack jobs on the right are not. And, you get to a point where when you read it all, you can start, I think, just discerning.
Hi, up here. Sally, can you talk a little bit about, you talked sort of broadly about the sort of institutional support you've gotten when the legal threats come in. And one of the things that makes I think makes a lot of us hopeful about the future of journalism is that it's, we're in an age where you can just go out and start writing and start digging things up and start reporting. But in many cases, you may lack the institutional support of a publisher or a news organization that's got deep pockets and good libel lawyers and libel insurance. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the experiences that you've had that maybe if you were starting out right now, you'd say, this is what I look for, because I know I'm going to get sort of strong legal backing. They're not going to sort of shy away from a fight. They're going to support me. Either in the form of people that you work with, or institutions, or sort of habits or systems, or whatever it might be.
Well, I think that was one of the things that was so dispiriting and disappointing to me in this most recent book. Because every book is really an intellectual stretch, and it takes everything out of you. It's a 4-year process. You're given it everything that you have in your mind, and you bring all of your skills to bear. And all of my other work, everything I've done, anytime, I've only been sued once, but every time I've been threatened, every time a publisher has been threatened, every time that somebody started putting pressure, there was pressure on Knopf not to publish The American Massacre. There's been pressure on a lot of my books, and nobody ever backed down. And I always felt like they had my back, that the editors, they were giving me a lot of money up front in advances to write these books, and I assumed that they had my back, and they always did. Anybody who's threatened before, my publishers came in with a team of lawyers and put them on notice. This is all true, this is all vetted. So it was really disappointing with Simon & Schuster, because that just kind of, the first time it happens to you, when Maury Zinoff fires me in Boulder City, I'm like, who cares, you know, it's Maury Zenoff. But, you know, when it's one of the most powerful publishers and you know, illustrious publishers in the world, then you kind of think, well, what's the point of all this, you know? But I think that, you know, going forward as a young reporter and starting, I think you pick your bosses carefully, I guess.
What impact did Jack Anderson and Drew Pearson have on journalism, in your opinion?
You know, of course, Drew was dead by the time I got there, and Jack was, I mean, it was insane to me. When I got there, he was in 1,000 newspapers. There were about, I'd say, 14 of us total, and we were all in our 20s doing all of his work. But he was in 1,000 newspapers, had 5 radio shows a week on Mutual Broadcast Radio, was on Good Morning America, ABC, 3 days a week, had Parade magazine twice a month, and a really small group of us writing all of that. And it just always seemed to me like such a squandered empire. By the time, you know, by the time he, at the end of the column, it was gone. You know, there were, he had just, he had so many documents and files of Drew Pearson's. I now know, well, I knew it then while working for him, that, you know, that he was not without his political friends and enemies and biases, and he was an extremely powerful man when I was there. He was really at the height of his career. And I think he had a huge impact on, when I went there initially as an intern, and we were all in this building on 16th Street, and every day the mailman would come with a huge gunny sack kind of mail bag full of letters, and every day, all week. And the letters were from everybody in America writing him. You have to come to my town in Virginia, the mayor's crooked, you know, or somebody, I'm in Arizona and the whole city council, wait till you look at this company, and you know, they're getting money from this contract. And it was just unreal. It was such an eye-opener to me that, wow, is all of America steeped in this, all these little towns and cities? And he was just, you know, our job was like, go through this pile and see if there's anything. And to me, there were like 40,000 stories. I mean, how do you choose? So I think he was a very powerful, I think he had a very strong impact in America also at the time. He was kind of waning just post-Watergate. But I think he had a really powerful impact on America, like encouraging whistleblowers and looking at good government.
I wonder if you could talk about maybe your personal experience in investigating and how you gathered the information. I can understand the New York Times as their sources of protection and everything, but you were kind of on your own. Did you go through a bunch of dumpsters and letters and stuff like that, or surveil people? Or,
no, I don't. I never
do anything. And kind of when you did feel threats, did you feel that your life was really endangered? And did you ever do anything to try to protect yourself or your family in those circumstances?
Well, I always, whatever threats I got through law enforcement that they had picked up on a wiretap or something, and they ended up always providing the protection that was necessary. As far as information, I found, I like documents from actual, you know, government organizations or I mean, I've always found, in fact, even when I was a private eye, I never believed that surveillance normally would give you anything that you couldn't get. You can find out, okay, so someone's going here or there, but that doesn't tell you what they're doing, what the relationships are between the two people that, you know, are being surveilled and being seeing each other. So I just always wanted to find, you know, if there's some criminal conspiracy or serious malfeasance going on, there's somebody that's going to know about it. There's going to be a document in the FBI, there's going to be a source in the FBI or the DEA or the ATF. The Bluegrass Conspiracy, as it turns out, was this huge international conspiracy, and I was able to put it together because ATF wasn't, there were probably a dozen law enforcement agencies throughout the country and Interpol internationally investigating this group, but they were also jealous of each other that nobody was sharing information. So I went to ATF, FBI, DEA, CIA, Customs, and got local law enforcement, sheriff, state police, and got bits and pieces of it from each of them, and then there was this cohesive whole that they could have all gotten if they just speak to each other and not be jealous of each other's fiefdoms and agencies.
Well, thank you all for the very good questions. I'd like to ask Monique Laxalt to come to the stage for presentation.
Well, Sally, first I'd like to say, on behalf of my sister Kristen and I and our children and our grandchildren, we're so honored to have you here and to have you be the Distinguished Writer this year. It seems like a full circle event, and it feels so right in all of our hearts.
Thank you.
And I also wanted to say that I think the word for the day, at least in my mind, is courage. And that's what you just emanate and have for your whole career. And that's something that is so unique in this world. And we have such admiration for that. So with that said, it's a great pleasure. I would like to present you with the Robert Laxalt Distinguished Writer Medallion. So
matches my outfit.
Beautiful.
Well, thank you all. Please join us outside for a book signing and an opportunity for more conversation with Sally. But please join me in another round of applause for our